These are good times for America. We have more than 14 million new jobs, the lowest unemployment in 24 years, the lowest co-inflation in 30 years. Incomes are rising, and we have the highest home ownership in history. Crime has dropped for a record 5 years in a row, and the welfare rolls are at their lowest levels in 27 years. Our leadership in the world is unrivaled. Ladies and gentlemen, the state of our union is strong.
The USA has dominated all the major areas to be the superpower and the most developed economy in human history. But with changing paradigms and other economies developing quickly, can the USA still be called a superpower? With nearly 800 military bases, 25% of the global GDP, and unprecedented power of influence on nations across the globe, the USA has stood at the top of the global leadership race for the last 4 decades. The impact of the dollar can be seen everywhere in the world. Still, the superpower tag of the USA might be in trouble, as multiple factors are challenging the global influence of the USA, and things are changing faster than we might notice, which is making us question, can the USA be called a superpower today? Now, to answer this question, let's take a flashback ride, first to understand how the US became a global superpower in the first place. While the US boasts the most extensive overseas military base, the largest economy, and leadership in strategic international institutions today, it has not always been that way. Back then, American presidents focused more on protecting the nation and staying out of international entanglements or affiliations. George Washington, the first US president, declared in his farewell address, "It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliance with any portion of the foreign world." In particular, he objected to US participation in the power conflict bedeviling Europe then. And this strategy worked well. Early American leaders expanded the country's domestic territory, grew the economy, and got European imperial powers to pack their bags and leave the Western Hemisphere. This tactic was the best because the country tripled between 1783 and 1853. Between 1865 and 1898, just after the Civil War, coal production skyrocketed by 800% and railway track mileage by 567%. By the middle of the 1880s, the US had surpassed Britain as the leading manufacturer of steel and goods. While the US became a powerhouse of productivity in the region, it stayed far away from foreign politics. But the eureka moment came for this young, growing country. In its early days, the Spanish, French, and Britain controlled nearly all European territories and raked huge profits. This level of dominance troubled sitting US presidents, who feared another recolonization was in sight. President James Monroe had warned Europe's empires not to meddle in the region, as his country would not tolerate further colonization or puppet monarchs. Understandably, the US had taken an interest in nations of the Western Hemisphere and didn't want to ruin its chances. This warning would later be known as the Monroe Doctrine, a series of annual messages delivered to Congress by the president in December 1823. Of course, the leading superpowers dismissed these threats, believing that America lacked the funds to implement such threats. But guess what? The Monroe Doctrine was invoked in 1865 when the US exerted military pressure to support the then Mexican president, Benito Juarez. On December 8, 1861, European forces invaded Mexico to recover unpaid debts. The invasion saw Napoleon III installing Maximilian as the Emperor of Mexico. The US support helped Juarez lead a successful revolt against the emperor and free Mexico from the shackles of Western forces. The first ever giant leap towards attaining a superpower status was the Spanish-American War of 1898. By this time, America had amassed so much economic strength that it could compete favorably with Europe. Yet, it was not confident of victory. However, influential Americans like Thomas Jefferson urged their leaders to champion a course to expand its geopolitical influence. The First and Second World Wars cemented US supremacy over former elites. It defeated Germany and Japan.
Throughout the world, throngs of people hailed the end of the war in Europe.
General Eisenhower informs me that the forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations.
After the war smoke cleared, the US maintained an unprecedented global power. Not only did it boast an unbeatable military, it also had the most valuable currency, the dollar, and the economy doubled in size after the war. When the Soviet Union fell in 1991, it felt like America was the only superpower in the global playground. That is what it is today, or perhaps what many people think it is today. From being accused of causing various geopolitical mishaps to facing a serious issue of de-dollarization. Let's see what are the major factors which challenge the USA's superpower status. A superpower is a country with global influence over others in technological, cultural, military, and political spheres. At the same time, the US is currently leading this cause. China and Russia are strong contenders for the position. Amidst current geopolitical tensions, there is speculation about which nation will emerge as the next global superpower. China is the #1 contender for many reasons. First, it is rare to pick up an item in the US without the legendary 3-letter words "Made in China" boldly written on it. To add icing on the cake, China is the world's largest exporter. In 2022, it exported goods and services worth $3.5 trillion, followed by the US with $3 trillion. Even more scary is Beijing's One Belt and One Road initiative to stimulate economic growth across Asia. The project aims at building massive infrastructure connecting countries around the globe. China is expected to invest $150 billion annually and a cumulative $900 billion by the end of the project. There are plans to construct a port in Pakistan, railways to Russia, bridges in Bangladesh, and more to create what China calls a modern Silk Road and pave the way for a new era of globalization. While it expands its economic base, China also ticks the technological domination box. This once notorious copycat nation now boasts an entrepreneurship spirit that competes with Silicon Valley. Today, China is a leader in digital payment, with its market 50 times larger than the US. Unlike the West, which transitioned from cash to credit cards, China skipped this concept and favored mobile payment methods. The rise of the Chinese economy, the technological boost, and the growing middle class saw over 80% of all transactions made via mobile payment methods in 2018. By the end of the year, over 40% of all global e-commerce transactions occurred in China and attracted 11 times the number of mobile payments as in the US. Do you know what's even more intriguing? The West wants a piece of this communist country. Its sheer population of over 1 billion people gives it an unrivaled buying power. Consequently, American companies like Google and Facebook are itching to fully re-enter China and consciously adjusting their policies to meet Chinese policy mandates. Away from China, Putin's Russia is vying for this coveted position of a superpower. To this day, Russians believe their country is great and exceptional. This is little wonder they frowned at Barack Obama's description of Russia as a regional power.
Yeah, America's got a whole lot of challenges. Russia is a regional power that is threatening some of its immediate neighbors, not out of strength, but out of weakness.
Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine makes this debate even more relevant today. Realists argue that Russia must never be provoked or humiliated because it could unleash mayhem on the world. How likely is this assertion? Russia's energy export is one of the highest in the world, with Russian energy company Gazprom generating a total revenue of $34 billion in the first half of 2022. The company also controls 34.7% of the European energy market, making it an essential element in Russia's regional geoeconomics. If becoming a superpower means having nuclear weapons, then Russia is one to be feared. Moscow and the US hold 89% of the world's nuclear warheads. But there's more to owning nuclear warheads. During 3 months of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, its army lost 30,000 soldiers, 200 jets, 1,300 tanks, and a flagship. But then, China remains one of Russia's comrades in arms. Both powers are forming a solid anti-US alliance to oust the current order. Over the past decade, they've developed very close military ties, despite their uneven economic relationship. What Russia or China alone cannot do, an alliance of China and the Russian Federation will do. If you like this video so far, consider subscribing to us. We're new in the YouTube space and aim to deliver the best knowledgeable content for our viewers, and your support will help us to keep giving our best. The USA is not only struggling with an alliance of Russia and China, but also with de-dollarization and new emerging currencies set to dominate the world. De-dollarization. Imagine a world where US dollar is no longer the world's currency. What will happen to the global financial system if that happens? Will the nations around the globe use SWIFT? Will it affect USA's economy? Well, even an idea of this imagination is enough for someone to think their hair off. But this seems to be an impossible change that might become true. For over 80 years, the US dollar has dominated international reserves, reigning supreme as the primary currency in global trade. It all started with the Bretton Woods Agreement, signed at the end of World War II, and negotiated by 44 countries.
Representatives of 28 countries, with Lord Halifax signing for the United Kingdom, meet in the conference room of Washington's State Department for the signing of the Bretton Woods Monetary Agreement.
The meeting saw countries agreeing to peg their currencies to the superstar US dollar. It also established the greenback as the primary currency of international trade. This explains why commodities like natural gas and crude oil are priced in dollars. The dollar remains the principal currency held by the world's central banks. Today, 88% of international transactions are conducted in US dollars, with 58% of global foreign exchange reserves in the same currency. With such a level of dominance, the US dollar allows the USA to use it as a weapon, and likewise, when Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022, the US froze half of its currency reserves, while the EU banned Russia from its biggest banks from the SWIFT international payment system. 7 Russian banks were affected. This exclusion means Russian companies would lose access to SWIFT's smooth and instant transactions. Banks are now forced to deal directly with one another, adding extra costs and delays, ultimately leading to revenue cuts for the Russian government. As if that was not enough, the US froze private assets and imposed sanctions on individual corporations. This move has dramatically affected Russian oligarchs, who have seen their fortunes cut in half. The Chinese government criticized the use of sanctions as a geopolitical weapon. In an attempt to seize the opportunity, China proposed using the Chinese yuan in foreign exchange swaps. China's holdings of US debt have fallen below $1 trillion, indicating a desperate attempt to free itself from the almighty dollar. Many other countries have taken a similar stand. In June 2023, Pakistan departed from its long-standing reliance on the US dollar for export payment and used the yuan to pay for Russian crude. Similarly, Argentina's Secretary of State for Trade, Matthias Tombolini, announced the settlement of transactions worth a whopping $2.721 billion, with China using the yuan as the legal tender. In another significant development, China and Brazil, 2 economic powerhouses, agreed to trade using their domestic currencies. Even more frightening is that opposing world economies formed a group with the acronym BRICS to build a united front to fight against perceived economic sabotage. Now, the BRICS countries have big dreams. Over the past years, they have considered other currencies for cross-border transactions. Switching things up a little more are Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and the United Arab Emirates, exploring alternative currencies too. The most ambitious path for BRICS countries will be to adopt a single trade currency. Unfortunately, some analysts have shunned that possibility and identified many problems. For this to work, all countries must have an efficient payment system, agree on an exchange rate, and have a stable financial market. The chances of success are still slim, given the country's political complexities and power dynamics. On June 1, 2023, Saudi's Foreign Minister, Sheikh Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, and his Iranian and Emirati counterparts attended the meeting of the BRICS bloc to diversify its strategic international alliances beyond the US. One wonders why Riyadh is so open about its rift with the US, mainly because in previous decades, tensions between both countries were resolved behind closed doors. Given that 1 in 10 countries are under US sanctions and tens of thousands of individuals are excluded from the global banking system for violating Washington's rules, a de-dollarization policy will likely increase monetary sovereignty and reduce dependence on the dollar. The latest alliance promotes using other currencies like the Chinese yuan, Europe's euro, Russia's ruble, or a unified virtual currency in international trade. This will automatically weaken the US dollar's status as the world's #1 currency and significantly reduce its impact. Military distrust. With a power rating index of 0.0712, the US boasts the most powerful military in the world. To put this in perspective, it has by far the largest defense budget of $817 billion in 2023, with China following second place at a distant $224 billion. From its elite forces, spending power, and the most extensive collection of combat units, the US military has a lot going on. Like other countries, the US Armed Forces have one mission: to protect the country from local and foreign enemies. However, a blazing new report from the National Independence Panel on Military Service and Readiness shows that civilian leaders who seem more interested in partisan politics than warfighting undermine the military's ability to do its job. The report highlights these deficiencies under several headings. First, poor recruiting success indicates that the military is struggling. It had the worst recruitment year in 2022, and 2023 is projected to worsen. At the end of 2022, the Army fell short of 15,000 soldiers of its recruiting goal. Other services like the Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force usually start a fiscal year by reaching at least half of their recruiting goals. But as of October 2022, the percentage was off by as much as 50%. Secondly, the report shows a sharp drop in American confidence in the U.S. military. Wavering public trust is the #1 reason for the recruitment shortfall. In another poll, the Military Family Advisory Network found that the percentage of military families who would likely recommend military life declined by 62.9% in 2021, down from 74.5% in 2019. While there's a long list of data on reasons for public distrust, the panel concluded that the major contributor was that the Pentagon is more concerned about partisan politics than military effectiveness. There is so much to talk about and explain about partisan politics in the USA. We'll surely make a dedicated video of partisan politics in the USA. Controversial policies like reducing fitness to include women and other groups, advocating for racial preference, and prioritizing environmental ideology instead of environmental stewardship have raised eyebrows. Following this trend, there are indications that military retention will suffer a decline soon. That is, the U.S. will have fewer service members staying beyond their initial enlistment. The Navy understands this reality and has since waded into the looming crises by increasing incentives for sailors to remain in service and erasing all records of past physical fitness test failures. Banking and financial collapse. There's more trouble in paradise than we can imagine. Military distrust is not the only hot-button threat against U.S. superpower status. Inflation is also weakening the standing of the world's most powerful currency. Since the 1980s, the U.S. has maintained a steady inflation rate, increasing savers' confidence in holding their assets in dollars. Unfortunately, the last few years have seen inflation rise to unimaginable levels, casting doubts as to the stability of the dollar for long-term savings and investments. The situation got bitter when 2023 saw the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank, Silvergate, Signature, and First Republic Bank. SVB provided financing for nearly half of all U.S. venture-backed tech and healthcare companies. It was the most preferred for startups. Bank failures are common with emerging markets, but for financial bigwigs like the U.S., terrifying to say the least. World leaders insist that change is necessary against the backdrops of these fluctuations. As of 2023, there is no denying that the USA is still a global superpower and no other country out there. Considering the internal conflicts China is facing, the USA can be stress-free for now. But the gap isn't too wide. Considering all the factors, Washington needs to start changing their course or add new policies to either strengthen them or at least win the trust of their global allies. Comment down your thoughts as to what you think regarding the rising opposition to the USA Superpower Tag, and if the USA will maintain it or not. This is The Shadow, and we'll see you in the next video.